I've seen so many smart people miss out on job offers during interviews because they're asking the wrong questions. So here are some questions that you should definitely stop asking during interviews, and here are some questions that you should start asking to make sure you land that job. I've gone through hundreds and hundreds of interviews and hired many people as well. And one of the most common things that I've seen is when it comes time for questions at the end, people kind of get flustered. And you might not think that this is a big deal, but chances are if you're not prepared for that section of the interview where it's your turn to ask questions, you're really missing out on something. And in some cases, you're costing yourself that job offer. Because that part when the interviewer turns it around and asks, what questions do you have for me? It's not just a check the box activity and it's part of the routine of an interview. What interviewers actually are trying to get at when they ask you that is to understand your way of thinking and to understand what's important to you, and ultimately to understand if you're a great fit for the company or not. So there's a lot to be said in that section of the interview where they turn it around and they say, what questions do you have? Now, one of the very common things that I think a lot of people do is Google. They start looking up the company name and they start looking up things in the news or articles about the company. While that's okay, that is very basic. And that doesn't really show a lot of your thought process, and it doesn't really show a lot of your leadership around how you think or how you process information or even how you problem solve. All of that can come through just in the form of your question. So instead of just scratching the surface and asking a generic question like, I did some research on your company and I found that you have a big investment recently around AI. I'm really interested in that. Tell me more about what you think. While that on the surface is a pretty good question, it's something that you could find on Google, and it's something that ChatGPT probably spit out for you. Instead, what you can do with that same information is ask a question like this. I was reading up a little more on your company and stumbled on the fact that you recently had this big investment around AI. And personally, I think that's the future, and I think there's a lot of opportunity there, especially in some of the more repetitive types of roles that exist. I'm curious to hear what you think and how that might tie back into the overall vision for the company in the next 5 years. That question is much more powerful and much more impactful because it not only highlights the fact that, of course, you did your research, but you also then slipped in what you think about it, what your thought process is, and then you turn it around in the form of a question to say, I want to hear more about the company and I want to understand the bigger picture and the vision. So what that does for the interviewer is it allows them to get a little peek into your mind. And the interpretation of that question will probably be, wow, this person seems very smart, and they're also able to think critically about something that's happening in the news or in the real world, but they're able to add their own spin to it, and they're able to think about the long-term benefits or the long-term impacts. Those are all great signs of leaders. So if you show up in that way in an interview and you change a basic question of, I did some research and I found this, to, I did some research, I found this, and I think this, what do you think? How does this connect back to the big picture? That is a great question. The other kinds of questions that you want to avoid is if you ask them something like, can you tell me about your experience at this company? Or can you tell me about the different roles you've held at this company? Because that's usually something you can already find on LinkedIn. And it just comes across very bland if you just ask, tell me more about your experience. That's not very thought-provoking. Instead, what you can do is ask about something that you actually care about. So a lot of times that question of, can you tell me more about your experience, is asked because what you're actually interested in is hearing about the career growth opportunities, or how often and how quickly they've moved up in the company, and what success might look like on this team. Those are all much better questions than just to ask, can you tell me about your experience here? So if you were to ask, I've noticed you've moved around quite a bit, or I've noticed on LinkedIn that you've changed roles every couple of years. I'm really intrigued by that because career growth and development is very important to me, and I want to learn more about your experience in terms of how you've grown at the company. What do you think about that? That question comes across much more impactful and thoughtful because you're actually asking the underlying thing that you care about, which is career growth, career opportunities, and developing yourself. To an interviewer, that comes across as more genuine, and that comes across as you're actually being honest about wanting to stay long-term at a company and you have an intention of growing your career here as opposed to just seeing it as a job. I frequently get questions like this, and I'm very happy to be able to share with everyone here my knowledge and experience, since I also personally have navigated through that path in the corporate world and in the professional world. So if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to me, and I look forward to meeting you. Take care.